The UK government is in chaos. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was just sacked by the UK Prime Minister Liz Truss, placed by Jeremy Hunt, the former Foreign Secretary, who somehow is now fit to be the Finance Minister. In this edition of the Spotlight, we will look at how and what went so wrong for Prime Minister Liz Truss and her so-called mini-budget, with calls ringing louder for her resignation, and whether there's a lifeline for the UK economy or not. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of the Spotlight. Historian and journalist Tony Gosselin joins us from London. Also joining us is President of the European Institute for International Law, Mahmoud Rafat, who joins us from Stockholm. Welcome to you both. Tony Gosselin, I'll first start with you. Basically, let's find out from you what is your explanation behind what is going on, especially when it comes to this mini budget, which is now turned out to be a real crisis for Liz Truss and her premiership.
Well, I think there's a certain degree of sabotage going on within the British economy. We had a whole month during September where there was a leadership contest between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and the promise that Truss gave to all of those Conservative Party members was, "I will reduce your taxes." Well, of course, they just were thinking with their wallets and voted for her. The trouble is that actually there is nowhere that she could reduce taxes at all, really, because the markets have reacted in the way that the only way they could, which is to saying, well, if you're going to reduce taxes, that means that the government borrowing, it cannot be paid back, and therefore we're going to have to, really, I suppose, punish you and tell you that we want the government to be able to pay its debts. And that's what they've done. The markets have punished them. They've said, if you're going to be cutting taxes, you're not going to be able to fulfill your budgetary needs in paying all these debts back. The fact is, the only place at the moment where Truss and the government can actually get enough tax in is from the super rich. And these are the one group of people and the most powerful businesses. The businesses are very good at not paying tax, by the way. But the super rich, as they get paid income in Britain, they have, it's very easy to take that tax off them, and she was going to cut that. So, I mean, it was a disastrous policy from the start, just built on greed from the Conservative Party members voting for her. But as I said, I think there's an element of sabotage here. There are some powerful influences out there that do want to see economies crash. We've seen it in many other countries around the world. Okay. Argentina, I mean, the list goes on. And what happens is, as those economies start to crash, because most people think, well, you don't want that to happen, but some people do want that to happen, is they are then able to buy up all those assets for very little money and make an absolute fortune. We're talking about the people like George Soros, international dealers and traders that can make a fortune on a crash. This is the trouble, is the international markets, particularly those centred in the EU
right.
and in London, in the city, and in Wall Street, are basically like a casino. And so games are played, and that's what's been happening. And Liz Truss has completely lost touch with reality. This Chancellor, what they were doing is they were trying to do things which just had no economic sense to them whatsoever. And so I think now Kwarteng has gone, Liz Truss is going to have to go very soon because she backed him all the way, and the Conservative Party is going to have to find a new leader.
Let's get into what the Institute of Fiscal Studies has said here, Tony Gosselin, because basically they pretty much hit the target when they talked about this mini-budget. They called into question in terms of where the money was going to come from, and that was about, what, 60 billion pounds that the UK will need in spending cuts. It said that unfunded tax cuts need to create that money, but how will the UK economy be able to do that? Of course, we know in the books they have forecasted a certain percentage of growth. I think it was 2.5%, but they said at best 0.7 or 0.8% is how much the UK economy is going to grow. So that's a blatant piece of fact that's out there. How did Liz Truss and her former Exchequer plan to convince people of that, which at this point is a void now?
I don't think they thought it through at all. I think that they had basically taken a few lines from an advertising agency in order to get themselves into power, get themselves elected in the election campaign over the summer, but they hadn't actually thought about what the implications might be. Look, let me just spell out a couple of basics here, because there is this thing called quantitative easing, or printing money, that the Bank of England's been doing. It's been using that money that it's created to purchase government bonds this week. It's just decided yesterday it's going to stop doing that, apparently, which means on Monday, when the markets open, God only knows what's going to happen. We could have all sorts of problems with pensions, house prices could tank, mortgage rates going up. You know, this is becoming much more expensive for ordinary people. What should really happen with the money the Bank of England are making it up is they should just gift it to people who are on benefits, people who are on low pay, people that can't afford to buy food, are having to go to food banks. Give it to them. Give each one of those people who are having to claim government subsidies as social security or whatever, £2,000, because you know what? They'll spend the money, and that will help all other elements of the economy. Because the way that they're spending this money at the moment is just going into the pockets of the people who have shares, and it's going in for asset purchases, and it's going to the rich, basically. So give that money, Bank of England, to the poor, and you'll see the economy start to pick up. So that's a really basic thing to understand. I mean, what we've had is, you're right, lots of instability. July, the Chancellor was Rishi Sunak. August, the Chancellor was Nadhim Zahawi. September, the Chancellor was Kwasi Kwarteng. And now in October, we've got another Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. It gives the impression the Conservative Party haven't got a clue what they're doing.
Exactly.
And it's very unlikely that they will come up with policies now which will help the poorer people, which is actually it's the poor are the only ones who will actually manage to pick the economy up, I think, and get it moving again.
I'm going to now ask that question from you, Tony Gosselin. Our guest there talked about a decade, but then he went back all the way to 2003. Tell us if you think that this is something that's either been in the making for quite some time, or something that the UK maybe never really recovered from based on the 2008 financial crisis. If you want to take a look at the origins of, I guess, wrong policies or what have you.
Well, I can be absolutely precise and say, really, the origin of this is 1976. That is the removal of Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister, by the army in Britain and the far right and the right-wing army in Britain. They kicked him out of office and replaced him with James Callaghan. Anyone that doesn't know about this, there are some very good books on it. The Enemy Within, I think, is one of them, and the Wilson Plot is another one. Very interesting the way he was got, because he was managing the economy for the Labour Party, for the British people, and ever since then, I mean, we've had then, of course, the Thatcher era began in the 1980s, and that, I think, is actually the start of finance capitalism getting a grip on Britain. That is to say, everything is privatised bit by bit. I mean, Thatcher, it was like every 2 or 3 months another major state-owned industry was sold off to the international markets, and that meant that anybody in the world with a lot of money could just buy up British infrastructure. This was a beginning of the end, in a way, and what they called at the time Thatcher selling off the family silver. So now finance capitalism, whatever it is, 40 years later, has become absolutely king. Finance capitalism dictates the policies to prime ministers, Exchequers at their private residence. Finance capitalism dictates which broadcasters are owned by who. And so the two main organs that the public have got to defend them from voracious, rich, acquisitive people, that is to say, a democratic parliament, right, and the press, are both taken over by finance capitalists. And that's happened with the opposition Labour Party too, here in the UK, where we've got a so-called opposition party which doesn't even support ordinary workers around the country, as we're getting lots of strikes starting in Britain now, even keep with their wages keeping pace with inflation. Now, if the Labour Party can't even support that, they're clearly working, just as the Conservatives are, for the finance capitalists, for the City of London. And what we really need is a mixed economy where we have a government that asserts its strength, controls its infrastructure, and makes sure the poorest and the most or the least well off in the country are looked after, as well as the super rich. This government, and actually the opposition Labour Party, really only care about the super rich that pay their wages for their political parties now.
Well, you have to have a stable government to do that. And you talked about the Labour Party there, and you, Tony Gosling, and you talked about how there should be a mixed, I forgot the term that you used.
Mixed economy.
But the Labour Party says that the Tories have they've lost the right to govern. And they're saying that the Conservative Party is just going to try to cling to power. And if it does that, it's going to bring down the country with it. What other options does UK have then?
Well, look, do you want Tony Blair back? I mean, because Starmer is even more extreme than Tony Blair. So he also has lost the right to govern. No, I think there are some very simple, quick solutions, but these are actually taboo. But the simple, quick solution, number one, is what I said before, is the people's quantitative easing. That is to say, printing money and giving it to the poor in order to kickstart the economy. You know, maybe even give £10,000 to everybody with no savings. A very simple thing that they could be doing, and that would be a fraction of the money that the Bank of England have been giving to the rich over the last, well, isn't it now 15 years, is it nearly, that they've been, well, no, not quite, but a long time anyway. So the people's QE, give that to poor people. The other thing they can do is they can regulate the nationalised, the privatised industries, all of the infrastructure, the railways, the electricity, the water, the gas. They can just restrict that, and they can renationalise it for free. And once the government is able to set the prices properly, so that there's no racketeering going on in the infrastructure, everybody will be able to get on and make some money. So there's two very basic things. Another one, of course, is the bankers that were responsible for what we call the banksters for the financial crisis. Sure. The criminal bankers, they must be arrested and put in jail. Finally, I think those three measures would make a tremendous amount of difference and put the British economy back on track again. 30
seconds to Mahmoud Rafat. We're fresh out of time. 30 seconds, Mahmoud Rafat. We're looking at strikes. We're looking at possible outages of 3 hours, maybe, based on what's been announced, and, of course, the economy as it is. Where do you see the UK 3 months down the road?
Well,
that's it. Well, I got the answer from Tony Gosling. We lost you, Mahmoud Rafat. With that, we come to an end, unfortunately, of this edition of the Spotlight. I'd like to thank Tony Gosling, historian and journalist, and also like to thank Mahmoud Rafat, president of the European Institute for International Law. That does it for this edition of the Spotlight. From Kwasi Kwarteng and the team, it's goodbye until next time.